This is the one that's going to get me into trouble. Today I want to talk to you about the collapse of the Roman Empire and the parallels with today. Not with regards to inflation, economics or any of those aspects, but with regards to religion and the world view. You see, as the Roman Empire expanded, it subjugated tribes. And those tribes had their own gods. And there was a tolerance for those gods. Now, there was subjugation to the Roman gods, and there was also like an aspiration from those tribes to be powerful and civilized like the Romans and their gods. But essentially, as the empire expanded, the Roman gods were no longer the only gods within the Roman Empire. This led to a softening of that worldview. This led to fertile ground for Christianity to explode through the Roman Empire. Now, that's a very strong statement. And it's massively simplifying the whole process. But let's try to grok this. Let's try to say as well, before I get burnt at the stake, that the Christian worldview can be seen as a more real framing for the world. How do I mean by that? I mean to say that in the pagan worldview, which again is a Christian word, just for reference, but in that worldview, there is no divine design. We are earth emerged from the ground, and we scream our glory, we scream our honor, we just defy. It's very individualistic. Now, so the aspiration in that world is for glory, immortality through glory, not immortality through bearing our suffering. The mission for the individual is to have some form of legacy and honor and some sort of impact in the world. Very individualistic. It's not aiming towards building the city of God, which is much more collective. Now you have to recognize as well that all of this is happening after the collapse of the Bronze Age, and you're running up into that problem of, yes, your towns now get up to your Dunbar number and stuff like that, but now you're getting towns kind of being too close to each other, and you're getting pluralism just en masse. It's a very fascinating moment in history, that kind of 500 BC to 500 AD roughly. And it's really no surprise that Buddha, Muhammad and Jesus all originate from that 500 BC to 00. So there's something about this time that there was more than just the Roman Empire happening. So again, I'm massively simplifying, massively so. But I want to point out, I want to pose the question to myself and see what sort of feedback I can get, is we're in a similar situation. We have expanded into globalism. We now have many, many, many different stories. So the earth is fertile for some more real, and that's the heretic in me, that's the blasphemy. Is there a more real framing of the world? Now, let's thread very lightly here. It seems, so we're getting some strange discoveries. AI, the construction of AI is kind of showcasing what psychedelics do. The fact that AI will narrow itself down and eventually become paralyzed in this purely forward-driven, logical safety pursuit. You have I've used the case of the depressed drones before. Drones, loads of them, they go flying out. Any dangers, they say that's not a good zone, but eventually every path, they've hit a bird or they've hit a line or they've hit something. So eventually they all just say, hey, by the way, the world's just not safe. And to counteract this, you need to either shut off like half the memory, or you need to increase the background noise so that essentially only the really, really big dangers get pointed out. So if you think of this as a load of mountains, and beforehand any elevated ground is danger, and eventually you have to like increase the background noise, like lift up mist so that only the peaks are visible. And this can be something similar then to psychedelics. You are only seeing peaks of your experience, and therefore you are making connections that wouldn't otherwise be made, potentially. Now that's just one potentiality. Then you have neuroscience showing that there's a dialogical nature to the brain, where there's a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere, and that you can have weird cases where in cases where you split the brain, usually to do with epilepsy, that you can have like a phantom hand syndrome where it seems like someone else is controlling your hand. Like very strange cases like that. That's at the extreme. But it's finding out that there's a conversation happening within our brain between our fight and flight and our rest and digest. All of that. Then you have cognitive science, which is saying that collective intelligence, rationality and intelligence are separate, and that collective sense-making is far more powerful than any individual. And again, look for your Stroop test, I think is that one, or maybe I'm wrong on that. I'll leave a link, or I'll leave like a little hashtag there. But we are getting all of this information. Now we get to the dangerous part, because we are also at the precipice of AI. And if even so, that's just, let's acknowledge that, but push it out for a second. So if I'm trying to say that there is something mystical needed to revitalize the world at the moment, there's another strong statement, but we'll stick with it. And I'm also saying that these collective sense making is much more powerful than any individual, and we are very much in an individualistic society. So the next step for more real framing would be somewhere where collective sense making is like way more fundamental. As in, like, yes, we used to have the family unit and stuff like that, but potentially there's going to be some newly emergent town centre, townhouse. Because in the old days, everyone would have come to their local townhouse and debated politics and debated what's going on in the town and all of this sort of stuff, that there might be some new version of that emerges. Again, we are so far off the shore at the moment. This is trying to plan out into the future. So hopefully I have grace here on this one. How do we avoid the kind of total opposite? How do we avoid losing the individual altogether? Because if collectives are stronger, then how do we not get rid of the individual? Now, for that part alone, I'm going to say that the dialogos practice is one step towards whatever that could be, because in the dialogos practice, the individual is kept. So it's a practice where there's 3 or 4 people and you talk about a virtue. You are having collective sense making on something that's important to everyone. But the individual is kept because the tension is actually valued in the practice. So it's really important. So I think something either there or beyond there will be the tool to maintain the individual. Now let's invite back in AI. Because AI will make possible democracy in a way that's totally different. AI will revolutionize the world in ways that we can't even imagine. It will connect us in ways, but it will create echo chambers. It will create structures. It will create things that... it will create things, and it's artificial, therefore it will create artificial things. Like, it's as simple as that. So how careful do we need to be? Do we return back to Christianity? Do we run back to that version of Christianity? Or is the ground fertile for some new, more real way of looking at the world? Now, I think this is where Neoplatonism comes in, and Jung and his archetypes, trying to see the world in a way that you get to see the patterns that are more real than the individuals themselves. When you see all of the dogs, what is it that makes a good dog? When you try to collect all of the examples of explorers, what is the true essence? What's the archetype of an explorer? Now, why do I say that? I say that because having something more real than the material is the thing that can drive us through the suffering. Because let's ask a question for a second. Why is the West so fascinated with Eastern culture? Why are we so fascinated with meditation, with martial arts, with yoga, with the idea that the spoken Tao is not the Tao? First line in the book. With the Buddhist idea that life is suffering. Why? Now, this might not be like a conscious exploration for you, but if you look at your media diet, if you look at the movies that are being released, ever since The Matrix, and even beforehand, this has been a remarkably consistent theme. So, in such a world, because there is a certain amount of truth to that, then how do we forge forward despite it? So, in that framework, now, there's an obvious spectre here. Okay, Nietzsche said that he wrote the book that would replace the Bible. Thus spoke Zarathustra. So, and he is the most influential philosopher over the last 200 years. Now, why don't I think that's going to be the turn? Is it just because he's already been around for 200 years and he is like that has yet to take over the world? No, I think it's actually more to do with that Cogsci revelation that collective sense-making far supersedes any individual sense-making. So as we circle around, as we collect around and we talk about what is it that makes a true explorer, what is it that makes a true a lover, a warrior, like all of these different aspects that are important to us, that we aspire to, and we do that in a collective sense. Nietzsche's philosophy didn't quite have that. Now, we can definitely incorporate his will to power. We all circle around, we all collect around these archetypes because we want to be more powerful. I'm not trying to say as it would be impossible to totally negate his entire philosophy. Just, it wouldn't happen. But do I think that his philosophy captures the next more real framing for the world? No. Even though he was remarkable. So I don't want to take anything away from him. But I think it'll be something more to do with this collective sense-making. So anyway, that is me putting forward... so the dialogos practice, as always, there's an invite there for it. It's a weekly thing. It's online, so it's very easy to try and fit into your schedule that way. As I said, I won't do the sales pitch. The question is, A, how educated are you on Plato and his cave and the land of the forms? How educated are you on Jung and his archetypes? Because I think that education will serve you greatly. You will appreciate every movie and TV show far better. You will look for something richer in your feed, considering that we are all consuming content now endlessly. Being an intelligent consumer, like that's what you need to do, is Plato and Jung's archetypes and the forms for Plato. So that's the first question. Second question is, do you agree that there's a softening of religion at the moment? Considering that the Pope at the moment seems to be embracing pluralism, which is something that I never thought I'd really see. So how does that fit in? Or does that even concern you? And then third, is it just heresy to suggest that there is a step into something more real? Are we simply going to recover what has been lost in the Christian story? Are we going to come back? Like, let's admit, like Paul Kingsnorth has it perfect where he says that we're not living the Christian story regardless. When has anyone gone into the desert for 40 days? When have we given that much? So like we're not living by that story. And is it that we're going to go further into the story? Or is there going to be some change? Again, my suggestion here isn't that there's going to be a change to the story itself, actually. The change here is going to be in the identity. So similar to the fact that the identity changed from the Romans to Christianity, where the Romans were, it was just, we rose up out of the ground and we dare to yell into the void, and the gods just play with us, and we rebel against it, and we do our best. And our identity then became, there is a divine blueprint, there's a divine maker and planner for the whole thing. But again, very individualistic. So my case here is that, will our identity change such that we are, yes, individuals, but it'll go into a collective grouping here somehow, some way. Now, I'm totally unsure of all of this. I'm posing this as a question. Any feedback, any thoughts on this would be vastly appreciated, because and by the way, the collapse of Rome happened over like 500 years. I'm not trying to say this is going to happen tomorrow or next week. This one might not happen in your lifetime, where this kind of precipice will happen, although I suggest economically it probably will, but collapses happen way longer than we think. So if this doesn't concern, that's okay. But if you have thoughts on this, I really would appreciate any sort of feedback. So guys, thank you for your time and attention. Until next time, I will see you next week. Bye guys.